Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of True Crime-Torial. My name is Janae Bowling. I will be your tour guide this evening or afternoon whenever you're watching this. So today we will be doing makeup as best as I know how because I'm not good at it, so bear with me here everybody. But today's episode is on Lavinia Fisher. So Lavinia Fisher was born in 1793. It is not actually known where exactly she's born or like her childhood records. Like there's no records of like her childhood, what it was like, where she was born, what her maiden name was, none of that. There's a legend behind this story of Lavinia Fisher is that she was the first female serial killer in the US. But because it's, you know, legend and all of that, most likely the first actual female serial killer was Jane Topin, who confessed to 31 murders in 1901, but she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. That's how that works. It's said that she is a beautiful, charming woman. Do I do my eyebrows first? What do I do first? I don't know how to do my makeup, guys. So it's said that she's a beautiful, charming woman, which she will later use to her own gain. Dun dun dun. I think that's too light. I never do my eyebrows. That's probably good. That's probably good. She later married John Fisher and they lived near Charleston, South Carolina. It doesn't actually say exactly where they lived, but they lived near Charleston, South Carolina. So they operated a hotel there in Charleston, South Carolina called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. And the reason why it was called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House is because it was 6 miles out of Charleston. Let's put my primer on. It's so hard for me to multitask, so I'm struggling trying to talk and read and do makeup at the same time. So they managed this 6 Mile Wayfarer House. What do I do first? Concealer. Okay, they managed this hotel in the 1800s because, reminder, she was born in 1793. So after they got married in Charleston, they were very popular. Everybody loved the Fishers because, one, she was beautiful and charming, and the other reason, I don't know. Blend. They're managing this house, everything is going fine, everything's all handy dandy, yippee skippy. Then, mysteriously, men started going missing. Nobody really knew what was going on. And so after a few reports started coming in, authorities found out that the last place that these people were seen was none other than the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. So authorities went by to check it out and they began investigating. Wow, this color is way too light for me, but it's fine, we'll fix it. But there really was no actual evidence that the Fishers were involved in the missing cases. And the Fishers were like extremely popular in the town. So like, no, that's out of the picture. But they were still extremely popular and still had standing in the town, I guess. But the case was eventually dropped. But as more and more men started going missing, rumors started flying around this town of Charleston, South Carolina. With the rumors came mobs, naturally. The locals got together a mob. So in February 1819, the mob ran the Fishers out of their home, but they left behind a man named David Ross to keep watch and make sure they didn't come back. So David Ross went through the night, you know, everything's fine, everything's all fine and dandy. And then the morning comes. But it's not like, oh, 8 o'clock in the morning, yawn, go to school. It's like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And David Ross is attacked by presumably 4 people and dragged to a group of other men. And he sees Lavinia Fisher. And so he's like, oh, sweet. Lavinia Fisher's gonna save me. Ha. Nope. Lavinia Fisher chokes the man, bashes him over the head, and throws him out of the window. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Ouch. Oof. So Lavinia is like, nah, not helping you, kid. Tough luck. But Ross survives. David Ross, who has just been choked by Lavinia Fisher and thrown out the window, has survived and runs off to tell authorities what has happened. at the home of Lavinia Fisher. While all of this with David Ross is happening, or like around this time, not exactly sure if they're happening in the same time, but it's kind of in this time frame of when everything was going down with the mob and all of that. So there is a traveler who is traveling from Georgia to Charleston and stops at the 6 Mile house for some rest and to ask for a room. So he walks in all, you know, ready to sleep, and he is greeted by Lavinia. Lavinia then tells him that there's no room. There is no room for you in the inn. But because she takes a liking to him, she offers him a meal. So she offers to have him like sit down and stay, and to drink some tea, and to just kind of, you know, hang out. Because granted, this man is tired, right? He's tired. He's been traveling all the way from Georgia to Charleston, and even if they can't offer a room, maybe they can work something out. So they get to talking, they have some tea and all this. This traveler's name was John Peebles. And John didn't like tea, but he liked Lavinia. So he was like, you'd think maybe he'd just like suck it up and drink it, but like, no, he poured it out whenever she wasn't looking. This man pulled a whole Eves McCronk on this woman. Anyways, so she invites him to tea, and all of this is happening, and they get to talking, and he's feeling comfortable with Lavinia, and so he opens up and they have a whole conversation. They talk, they laugh, they drink tea, all of this stuff, and all the while John Peebles is being eyed in an odd manner by Lavinia's husband John. So he kind of puts that to the wayside and is like, yeah, whatever, that's kind of weird, but like I kind of like this girl, so I'm gonna keep flirting with her anyways. Lavinia leaves the room and she comes back with more tea. And she also tells John Peebles, the traveler, oh, hey, guess what? A room has just opened up. And he's like, oh, sweet, thanks. So she takes him up to the room, and he begins to get kind of suspicious, or I guess worried, because once he gets up there, he realizes how tired he is, and he's probably like, oh crap, I've said some stuff that I shouldn't have said. Like, he was really worried that he had shared too much information with these people, which, yeah, he probably did. So because he was kind of freaked out and didn't want to be killed in his sleep, he slept in the chair by the door instead of in the bed. So he fell asleep in the chair and was thus awakened by a loud thump or crash or something of that sort. Use your imagination. When he awoke, he looked up and found that in the place where his bed was when he had fallen asleep, there was a giant hole in the ground, like around his bed where he should have been sleeping that night. So he jumped out the window, naturally, and ran to tell the authorities, as everyone does. Now, mind you, so has David Ross. So David Ross and John Peebles are expressing to the authorities, you know, what's happened at the Fisher's house, because, you know, this is some crazy stuff. So they open up another police investigation, and they actually arrest John and Lavinia Fisher and the 2 men that they were supposedly working with. So, upon arresting them, they search the Wayfarer house and find some interesting things, to say the least. The things that they found are multiple items that can be traced to travelers who have come and stayed at the Mile House. So that's disconcerting. They also find tea laced with sleeping herbs. I did some more research into this tea laced with sleeping herbs, and that was actually Lavinia's like MO. And the herb that was like mixed into it was a deadly plant called oleander. Don't know how you pronounce it. And that would make the guests feel ill, so they'd go to bed early. So they found that tea that was laced with that sleeping herb. They also found a mechanism triggered to open the floorboards underneath beds. Now, if you think back to what has previously transpired, that's a little bit scary, right? So that's actual evidence that they had the means to drop the floor out of John's room under his bed. But they definitely would have done horrible things to that man had they caught him. So they found this mechanism, and they also found, as legend says, as many as hundreds of sets of remains in the basement of this house. It didn't say whether the remains were human or animal, but they were remains nonetheless. Please bear with me, y'all. I am really freaking bad at makeup. So when they were arrested, they initially pled not guilty. but they were sentenced to stay in jail until their trial. They were not given bail, but their 2 co-conspirators were released on bail. So their trial was set for May of that year. That looks good. Anyways, obviously, the jury found them guilty of multiple robberies and murders. Both John and Lavinia were sentenced to the gallows. But they were given time to make an appeal. But while they were waiting for their appeal, they had to stay in jail because obviously they were convicted murderers. So during their time in jail, they planned an escape. Now, when I say planned an escape, I don't mean they took spoons to the wall and other stuff that you see in the movies, but they did do one thing that you see in the movies. They were not under tight security, so they made rope from their bed sheets and they planned to just crawl down that out the window. Don't know how they thought it was gonna work, but they didn't escape, didn't work. But on September 13th, they attempted to put their plan into place. So September 13th comes and they used the rope and threw it out the window to go drop down to the ground. Interestingly enough, John made it out, but Lavinia did not, because when John was crawling down the rope broke, and so Lavinia was stuck and she could not get out. But John, being the romantic that he is, didn't want to escape without his lovely Lavinia, whom he so dearly loved. So he went back into jail. I don't know exactly how he went back. I don't know if he just kind of like walked in the front doors and was like, hey, I just tried to escape, but I'm coming back now, it's all good. But when he did get back, they were kept under tighter security. Anyways, fast forward. In February of 1820, their appeal was rejected and their execution was scheduled for that month. So it's like, yeah, we're not gonna, allow your appeal. And also, you're gonna die this month. So have fun with that. So the jail brought in a priest. His name was Reverend Richard Furman, and he was sent to counsel the couple through death if they wanted it. John utilized this counseling, and he talked with Reverend Furman and practically begged the priest to, what the website called it was, quote, if you can't, and this isn't an exact quote, but basically he said, well, if you can't save my life, at least you can save my soul. It's supposed that John was saved when he talked to the priest, but Lavinia, on the other hand, literally didn't want anything to do with this priest. She was like, get out of my life, I don't need you, I don't want you, thanks but no thanks. So February 18th, they are taken behind Charleston jail to the gallows. Now, this wasn't like a, oh, so romantic, they were hung together. Like, they were hung separately. I think John was hung first and then Lavinia was hung after him, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So with John Fisher's hanging, he went quietly, is what they say. And he also went while in prayer with the priest. He also wanted the Reverend Richard Furman to read a letter to the crowd. In this letter, John insisted that he was innocent and asked for mercy for those who had done him wrong in the judicial process. And after the letter was read, he then verbally began to plead his case, but then kind of had a change of heart at the end, and right before he was hanged, he asked for the crowd's forgiveness. Moving forward to Lavinia's hanging. Lavinia did not go as quietly as John did, needless to say. Lavinia, first off, she did a few things that was kind of like, that's a little bit weird, especially if you're, about to die. But I mean, she seemed to be very selfish, self-absorbed, and that type of thing. So in her self-absorption, she requested to wear her wedding dress for her hanging. She also wanted to be carried to the gallows. She wouldn't walk. Now, mind you, she was perfectly capable to walk. She just didn't want to. So while she was being carried, she was literally kicking and screaming and blaming the Charleston socialites for encouraging the jury in her conviction, which is like the complete opposite of what her husband John did, though, just a second ago. So this is an actual quote from Lavinia Fisher while the noose is around her neck. She's about to be hanged. She says, quote, if you have a message you want to send to hell, give it to me, I'll carry it. Dun, dun, dun. spooky. She knew what she was getting into. So before they could finish the job, she actually jumped off of the scaffolding herself. Legend also says she didn't quite reach the ground, and so she just kind of like dangled into the crowd. And later on, onlookers say that, quote, they had never seen such a wicked stare or chilling sneer from another person's face. So she died at 27, or I guess was killed at 27. That's the legend of Lavinia Fisher. So there's actually a conspiracy surrounding Lavinia Fisher and what all happened with her and her story. Oh, mascara. Okay. In the book, it's called 6 Miles to Charleston, The True Story of John and Lavinia Fisher. There is a testimony from a former homicide investigator named Bruce Orr, where he says that not only are the Fishers innocent of these things that they've been convicted and killed of, but he also claims that they were the actual victims of political corruption. They were in fact the only owners of the 6 Mile house, and they were executed. So he states that maybe they were taken care of by the government, so the government could take the property and use it as a new naval base. So the Charleston Naval Hospital is actually now the building that sits on the land that was originally occupied by the 6 Mile house. Don't know if that conspiracy is true or not, but that's where we're at. So besides the conspiracy, as this story of Lavinia and John Fisher is a legend, there are some untruths to this legend. So the historical records don't actually indicate that there were hundreds of remains found in the basement, but a couple of bodies were dug up on their property. Bodies indicating human. So that part of the legend was a little bit stretched, but I mean, there were still bodies found on their property. Apparently there wasn't like enough evidence to actually charge them with murder. So they weren't actually charged with murder. They were only charged with highway robbery. They definitely did rob these travelers, and the offense of highway robbery was still considered a hanging offense. Although they weren't actually charged with murder, they were still legally hung. It's also unsure about the legend's part of her requesting to wear her wedding dress for her hanging. There's no actual evidence or records to say that she did, but there's also no records or evidence to say that she didn't either. So, I mean, it's possible. Also not sure if she did or didn't was if she actually ended up jumping off of the ledge herself, or if they ended up dropping the floor through. Like I said a second ago, there's not really any evidence to support that, but there's also not really evidence to disprove that. So that's the story, the real story, all the truths and untruths and everything of John and Lavinia Fisher. So she wasn't really the first female serial killer of the US. As I said at the beginning, that title belongs to Jane Topin. She confessed to killing 31 people. So moving on to the ghost of Lavinia. So it is said that the ghost of Lavinia still roams Charleston, South Carolina. Almost immediately after her death, the locals began to report seeing her face floating behind the bars of the window that she was held in the jail. Oh, this is red. And after the earthquake of 1886, people began to report her wandering around the other parts of the neighborhood, including the cemetery. But interestingly enough, her body does not lie in the cemetery. Her body actually was buried in a potter's field. That field was then built over top of to build the Porter Military School, and that was built over top of in 1964 to build Medical University of South Carolina. So even though her apparition is reported to have been seen in the cemetery, she's not buried there. So there's no sense in her haunting that place. There's probably other people there, but not Lavinia. Oh, this is red. Moving on to the jail. This jail was supposed to have held around 128 prisoners, but in its operation, as many as 300 were incarcerated there, and some of the prisoners were locked in cages that were barely the size of a person's body. So think, to fit in way over the capacity limit, you've got to have some tight spaces. But disease, torture, and violence within the walls were rampant, and an estimated 10,000 people died on the property during its operation. So naturally a place like that is gonna get haunted. Just saying. That is so freaking red. So the jail was actually closed in 1939 and it sat abandoned for the next 61 years. But in 2000, it was restored, and during its restoration, guys, there's some crazy stuff that went on during its restoration. So there were weird and strange sightings, including the workers finding footprints in the dust after the building had been locked off for months. The workers also saw the ghost of a jailer with a rifle on the 3rd floor, and he passed through bars heading towards them before he vanished. There's also been a reported sighting of a black man in ragged clothing wandering the halls, and another apparition who has been seen is the infamous Lavinia Fisher in her wedding dress. Creepy stuff, y'all. So also, along with those strange sightings, there have been strange sounds, such as the hum of a dumbwaiter. When the dumbwaiter, guys, the dumbwaiter has been broken for years, like years, okay? It's also said that alarms go off and on randomly. No one turns them off and no one turns them on. They do that on their own. Also, along with these sightings and sounds, there's also been physical experiences that have happened in this Charleston jail. So visitors and employees have complained of a choking feeling and shortness of breath while on the main staircase. There's also reports of people being grabbed, touched, pushed, and scratched by something unseen, and a tour guide tells of a story feeling a rope wrapping around her ankle. There was one time a man in the basement who had his sunglasses knocked off by a violent and unseen force. There's also strange smells, people feeling of being watched, people's breath coming out in a cloud of fog, and doors that are found open after they've previously been shut. So that's the story. There's a Ghost Hunters season premiere featured a visit to the jail where a skeptical cameraman experienced these scratches firsthand and can actually be seen in the camera shot. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the creepy story of Lavinia Fisher. Thanks for watching True Crime-Torial.